What is going on, everyone? My name is Andy. Welcome back to another FPL video. In this one, it's the Game Week 37 preview, so I'm going to talk about best captain options for this week and then answer a load of your questions as well. I didn't put out a transfer tips video yesterday because I wanted to just answer the more specific transfer questions that you've got in this video, and I think there's certain players that everyone is thinking about. So hopefully most of the stuff is covered in this video. If not, I'll cover it in team selection tomorrow and final thoughts on Friday. Otherwise, let's get into it. So let's start with captaincy. I think this is going to be one of those weeks where there's quite a spread of different captaincies over different teams. We had that a couple of weeks ago where some people went for Isak, some went for Salah, Marmoush, Burmo, etc. I think it's going to be another of those weeks. The top two options for me are probably Ollie Watkins and Cole Palmer. And I don't think it's any coincidence that they're playing Man United and Spurs, who are going to have one eye on Europe. And for that reason, even if Man United and Spurs put out a full-strength squad, which I don't think they will do, they're not going to be playing at that same intensity. And with Chelsea and Villa, you've got two teams that are still chasing Champions League places. So for me, they're probably the top two options. I think I just about prefer Watkins, especially seeing what Crystal Palace did to Spurs in the last game. The one thing I really like about Palmer is his ownership. It was super low last week, and he's not being brought in a massive way, whereas Watkins is. When I look at the transfers in for this week, Ollie Watkins is currently at nearly 200,000. The next highest amount of transfers in is for Eze, who I don't think is a great option to buy this week, 100,000. Everyone else is 60k or less. Palmer is 34,000. So Palmer's ownership was already lower than Watkins, and he's been brought in by 35,000 instead of 200,000. So if you are looking for a big differential this week, I think it's Cole Palmer. If you're looking for the player that's just going to score the most amount of points, it's close between the two. And I'd maybe argue that Watkins is a slightly better option. But I think from a differential point of view, Palmer is the one. And I'm going to talk about triple captaincy later. If you're looking for a proper differential triple captain option for the rest of the season, again, I think it is Cole Palmer. Will Nicholas Jackson missing out for Chelsea affect them? Probably a little bit. Whatever you think of Jackson as a player, I think him being in that Chelsea side is better for them overall. But they're still going to do well against Man United. And Cole Palmer, we know, is going to start. The only thing that I think might frustrate people is if you watch that game, when I've seen Cole Palmer play recently, he does drop deep quite often. That's not to say that he's never in the box. But a lot of the game is to drop deep, get the ball, and then kind of spread it around. And so I think that could frustrate people. But that shouldn't stop you from captaining him. So I'm going to say Watkins edges it just about. But as I've said a few times now, if you're looking for that differential, it's Palmer. I really like Burmo as well. We know he's definitely going to start. We know it's 90 minutes. We know it's penalties. Fulham don't really have too much to play for either. And obviously Brentford are fighting for 8th place. But his underlying numbers have not been amazing all season. And it's not to say he's a bad option. But I think Palmer and Watkins are specifically better this week. Also, James, when I was listening to Planet FPL podcast this morning, made a really good point. Brentford are fighting for 8th place, but if Palace beat Man City in the FA Cup final, they get a European spot and 8th place doesn't. So by the time Brentford play Fulham, if Palace have won, they'll know that getting 8th place means nothing. I mean, it's still nice to finish higher up the table, but in terms of European football, that would then be off the table completely. So that's a minor thing to think about. Either way, Burma will start, and I think Brentford will go for it. But there's a little bit less emphasis if they can't get European spots. Salah's always got to be up there, but Liverpool are definitely on the beach, quite literally. There's been pictures on social media this week. Arne Slot's in Ibiza, the team are in Dubai. And it's not to say that Salah individually is going to be a problem. I would not be surprised if ever since Liverpool won the league, if Salah's been in the gym every single day. And there's like the assist record to chase and stuff like that. But the rest of the team don't have that same... Care is not the right word, but their mind is not on football right now. They want to take a break. They want to prepare for next season. And that's going to mean the overall level of the team is not quite the same. So I think Salah is fine. If you're thinking, I don't want to go for Burma, I don't own Watkins, I don't own Palmer, default to Salah, there's no issue with that. But the Liverpool squad as a whole, it's not all eyes on football right now. Saka is definitely an option as well. I think that game between Arsenal and Newcastle is quite big. If Arsenal win, then Champions League is basically secure for next season. They'll get Champions League anyway, but it'll be mathematically done. But also, if Newcastle can beat Arsenal, they will go into second place. So Newcastle are going to be right up for that. It's going to be a high intense game. I quite like Saka as an option this week, but I just don't see him as better than in Burmo, Palmer or Watkins, to be honest with you. If you're someone that's got Erling Haaland in your squad from last week, there's going to be a temptation to double down because he didn't do anything against Southampton, or you might just be thinking he's a good option because no one else owns him. I don't hate the Haaland captaincy. That is another huge differential. He's not going to be brought in this week by many people. Let me just have a quick look here. 25,000 FPL managers have brought him in. To put that into perspective, Beto has been bought by 61,000. So Haaland's ownership is going to be super low. It's a home game against Bournemouth. Even if Man City win in the FA Cup final, they'll have to limit the celebrations because they need to get Champions League next year. And I think Haaland will probably start against Bournemouth. But what if he's played 120 minutes 3 days before? What if the rest, obviously, if he plays 120 minutes, so is the rest of the team. You just don't know how they're going to perform against Bournemouth. So that's my only worry. From a differential point of view, if you're not going Palmer, Haaland is the next best, I would say. I just don't like the fact he's playing in that FA Cup final. If that wasn't happening, I'd be much more keen on Haaland. So I'd have Watkins just about at the top, but I really like Palmer. I think it's quite close between the two, and his ownership is much lower. Then in Burmo, then probably Salah, then Saka, then Haaland for me. So let's move on to some of your questions. Is it really a smart move to go from Isak to Watkins? Now, I think that transfer is absolutely reasonable. You should definitely consider it. It's absolutely viable. And I really like Watkins for the final 2 game weeks. But don't feel like you've got to make that move. If you want to keep Isak, or if you just want to concentrate transfers elsewhere, that's absolutely fine. Watkins is a really good option this week. There's a reason nearly 200,000 people have brought him in. But we shouldn't now think that he's essential. Every week it feels like in FPL there's a new flavour of the week. Last week it was like Visser and Wood, it's been De Bruyne recently, etc. And they're all good options, but for specific teams it might not be the right move. You might have other issues that you've got to deal with, or you might just think that Newcastle are absolutely going to go for it against Arsenal, and then Everton at home last day of the season is not a bad fixture at all. So I'm not trying to sit on the fence, but I do think it's a situation where keeping Isak is fine, selling Isak to Watkins is also fine. And I think you really should consider captaincy as well. If you don't want to go for Mbeumo or Salah, or you haven't got Palmer, etc., and you think Watkins is the standout option, then that's another reason to move him on. And as much as Newcastle might want to go for it against Arsenal, Arsenal are going to put out a full-strength team, and they are not an easy defence to get past. And Newcastle probably will score a goal or two. They're a really good side as well. But I wouldn't see Isak getting a massive haul in this game. So at this stage of the season, with only 2 game weeks left, you've really got to focus on what you think is the most impactful transfer for your team. Do you want to target this week and pick up someone like Watkins, or do you want to target the fixtures in 38 instead? For what it's worth, I think Watkins is one of the best players to look to bring in for the final 2 weeks if you're moving this week. But if you want to keep Isak and have a spare transfer next week to go for a differential like Martinelli or Cliver or Semenyo or whoever it might be in game week 38 where Arsenal play Southampton, Bournemouth play Leicester, that's also fine, right? There's no massive reason you have to get rid of Isak. So I know that sounds like, you could go this way, you could go that way, you're just sitting on the fence, but there are lots of moves in FPL that are very close, and this is one of them. But I will say, if you've got nothing else to do, you're happy with your team in 38, I like taking it on. I'd rather have Watkins for 37 and 38 than Isak, but that's not to say that Isak's a bad option, because he isn't. So you can tell by all these questions that Ollie Watkins is not going to be a massive differential for game week 37. Is Cunha worth keeping this week, or should we simply sell him to Watkins? Now, Cunha is a bit frustrating if you've recently brought him in, because he was taken off before the 60th minute in game week 36. It's hard to know what the reason was for taking him off. Is Vitor Pereira now thinking, well, there's not really too much to play for, let's just play some other players? Was it specifically because he was on a yellow card? Did he just feel like someone else could affect the game more? We don't know. My gut feeling is that Cunha will continue to start, and he will start against Palace away in 37, and he will start final day against Brentford at home. But obviously there is some risk there. So this, whether to sell him is really going to depend on how the rest of the squad is looking. If you've got someone that you're not sure is going to play even more so than Cunha, or you've got an injury or a suspension, or you've just got players with terrible fixtures and you can massively improve on them by using a transfer, I would focus elsewhere. I think to sell Cunha, your squad's not got to be perfect, but in a really good place. where there's nothing else to do. And again, do I think that Watkins is better than Cunha for the final 2 game weeks? Absolutely. Probably more so than the Isak versus Watkins comparison, but I don't think it means you have to sell Cunha. I think he will start, and the chances are that he will play more than 60 minutes in the next game. But as I said last week, Cunha's minutes are not as safe as they were earlier on in the season. If this was 10 game weeks ago and Cunha was on a yellow card, do I think he would have got subbed off? No. He probably would have been left on because Wolves would have been making sure that they're in the Premier League next season. Now they've got nothing to play for. So I think it's fine to sell Cunha, especially if your squad's in a good place. But if you've got bigger issues to deal with, don't panic too much. I wouldn't be taking hits to remove Cunha, put it that way. So would you do De Bruyne to Palmer in game week 37 and then move to Saka in game week 38? Or go straight to Saka in 37 and have an extra transfer in 38 instead? This, again, is another of those really close calls where there's not a right or a wrong answer. Whichever way you play this is absolutely fine. And I tweeted this the other day. In some ways, when you get to the final couple of game weeks, things should be easier because you're only looking at 1 or 2 fixtures and it's very short term. But actually, in some ways, it becomes more difficult because you've got so many more options to play around with. Like, if these 2 players had the exact same 2 fixtures they've got now, but we were buying them for 6 weeks, and afterwards Palmer had Leicester, Southampton, West Ham, Everton all at home, and Saka had like Palace away, Liverpool away, Man City away, I'd absolutely just choose Palmer. It's the much easier decision. But because it's short term, in some ways I think it's more difficult. I think a lot of this comes down to how much do you value Palmer's captaincy in game week 37. My gut feeling is that Saka can do pretty much as well as Palmer in 37, and therefore maybe that extra transfer in 38 is better. So it might be that you get Saka now and then you go and buy a Cliver in 38 instead of having Palmer now and then having to spend that transfer on Saka and maybe having to play someone that you're not quite as happy with in 38. But if you are chasing, which most of us probably are at this point, and you really want, like I said earlier, that differential captain, I think it's Palmer. I think he is better than Saka this week. Saka is capable of doing as well against Newcastle as Palmer is against Man United. But if I'm putting money on who's the best option this week only, it's Palmer. I think he's ahead of Saka. So if you value that captaincy, I would go there. And then you can absolutely justify getting Saka in 38 because you've got another captaincy opportunity against Southampton. If you're looking at that Jackson's not playing, Chelsea won't be as good, I'm not happy with Cole Palmer recently. If that's your attitude towards him, don't buy him. He's just going to frustrate you. Just go straight to Saka and take a differential punt in 38. You could argue that Saka is the better option as well because you don't know if something might go wrong in 38. There could be rotation. We might get early team news for more teams because everyone plays at the same time. But I think that would be a smaller thing to think about. Honestly, if you value that captaincy and you really want to go for Palmer, that's the route to take. If you're not as bothered, I'd be tempted just to go straight to Saka. But genuinely, there ain't a right or wrong here because it's only for 1 or 2 weeks. And over a short space of time, anything can happen. I think over 6 to 8 weeks, when you're making a decision, things tend to even themselves out more, especially if one player's got much better fixtures. For 1 or 2 game weeks, who knows what might happen. For my team, I'm probably going to go Palmer first, then Saka. But I kind of want to captain Palmer this week. If you don't, Saka's good. So this is a good follow-up question. If you can't get to Saka, what other Arsenal attackers do you recommend, if any? And I think the if any is important because if you're looking at Saka and you decide to go a different route, you shouldn't feel like you have to buy a different Arsenal midfielder. So for example, if you've got the money to go to Bowen instead, I'd probably prefer him to all of Martinelli, Trossard and Merino. Forest at home, Ipswich away. So that is where I would look. I don't mind looking at Arsenal players as differentials though. Their ownership is not that high outside of Saka, and even his ownership is not as high as it's been previously this season. Newcastle at home, not bad. Southampton away last day of the season, very good. There is a chance that if Arsenal beat Newcastle, the team they put out against Southampton will have a bit of rotation, so that's a slight worry. Merino is suspended for Newcastle, so you can't buy him this week. Maybe if you delay the transfer, you could buy him in 38. Martinelli is probably the one, because I think he's nailed on for the Newcastle game. And then there's a chance he'll play Southampton as well. And if Trossard is injured, which we'll have to wait and see what Arteta says, because he did go off in the last game, seemed to have a bit of an injury, and Merino doesn't play, Martinelli could play number 9 against Newcastle, and then either play 9 or left wing against Southampton. So I think if I was taking a punt on current information, it would have to be Martinelli. And I do quite like him as a punt, by the way, especially if he starts in 38. I still don't think he's better than Bowen. And then with Trossard, we'll have to wait and see. I still think even if Arteta said Trossard is fine, I'd probably still go for Martinelli because I'd be a little bit more confident in his minutes. So if we assume Man City are going to beat Crystal Palace in the FA Cup final, would you start Triple Palace in their final home game of the season? Or do you still think they can be benched due to the short turnaround? The main takeaway should be, in my opinion, that there is some risk there, whichever way you spin it. Even if you're absolutely adamant that Man City are going to win in the final and there's going to be no rotation, there is still some risk with the minutes. Players could get sub pre-60, for example, even if they start. So we shouldn't be as confident in Crystal Palace players' minutes for 37, no matter what happens in the FA Cup final. And it's worth saying, absolutely, that Glasner often puts out a full-strength team and that this is the final home game, but it's 3 days after a final. I would treat it a bit like a double game week, where you have a game on a weekend, then midweek. And if you look what happened last time, when Palace had, games in quick succession, to be fair, 32 and 33 were both doubles, so it was a little bit different. But even then, Sarr played 27 minutes against Arsenal. When you look at Eze, I think one of the games had a red card, which might have impacted his minutes. But ultimately, in 32 and 33, he played 79, 56, 45, 62. Since then, back-to-back 90s. Before that, before 32, 81, 90, 90, 90, 89. The minutes are coming down, in my opinion, no matter what happens. Man City will be the favourites, and therefore it's more likely that Palace will lose. Even then, it's 3 days later, what's their mental and physical state going to be? And also, you can lose and still play 120 minutes, and that can have an effect. And this is what I've been saying. The problem is we won't know. So we have to just assign some risk to our decisions. Does that mean you have to sell Palace players? No. Does that mean you have to take hits to remove them? Absolutely not. You don't even have to bench them. But if you've got a player that's very similar, I would probably play that other player. If you think the Palace player is absolutely better, then maybe take the risk. But don't take the risk and then be shocked if they get benched. Basically, if we get to Tuesday against Wolves and Eze, Sarr, Munoz, Mateta all start, I won't be shocked. It could absolutely happen. If they're all benched, I also will not be that shocked. I think for what it's worth, Munoz is probably the one least at risk. I feel like that guy is just able to run for days. And even if you look at 32, 33, he played 90 all the time. And they've got less options to play in that position. They've got players that can play right wing back, don't get me wrong. I think Franca can play there. You've got Klein as well. But I think the drop down is more stark than it would be if you played a Kamada instead of an Eze or something like that. I mean, there's still a drop down there, don't get me wrong, in terms of quality. But I think it's more likely to happen. If Nketiah plays ahead of Mateta, wouldn't be a surprise at all. So that's all I can say. I think with these kind of questions, and I'm not saying the person that asked this is that person, but there's always a lot of people that want a definite, will they start or will they not? I can't tell you that. Nobody can. Like I said, we just have to assign some risk to the decision. And right now, for my personal team with Triple Palace, my gut instinct is to try and play as few as possible. Because if they win, they're celebrating. They've got to. That's huge for Crystal Palace. Rotation. If they lose, mentally it might not be great. They could play 120 minutes. There could still be some rotation or a reduction in minutes. But yes, Man City are favourites. That might not matter for FPL. So should I use my bench boost this week when my bench has slightly better fixtures, or save it for game week 38, which has historically been higher scoring in terms of attack and returns? My gut instinct would be to use it this week. Also, if we're saying that there's going to be more attack and returns in 38, that's also another way of saying there's probably going to be less clean sheets. And for your bench boost, at least one of the players will be a defender and one will be a goalkeeper. So I don't know if that really makes too much difference. And ultimately, if your bench looks better this week, I would probably just do it. Because even if you think 38 could be higher scoring, there's also more chance of getting an issue. Now, the chances of your team being decimated between 37 and 38 is quite unlikely, but you could pick up an injury or suspension this week, and your team could look even worse next week. There might be more attack and returns next week. There could also be more rotation as well, especially for teams that have got nothing less to play for. So at this point, if you've still got the bench boost, literally look at 37, 38. Unless 38 is a massively better bench, just get it used this week. So I've still got triple captain, only 2 games left. Any ideas? So for game week 37, the only 2 players that I would look at is Palmer and Watkins. I think if you're tempted by Salah against Brighton away, well, Salah's probably better in 38 against Palace at home. If you're thinking about Saka against Newcastle at home, he's probably better against Southampton away in 38. So Palmer and Watkins are the only two I'd really be tempted by. Even if you've got like a Haaland, I don't mind using it this week as a bit of a differential, like I spoke about earlier. But obviously there is more risk with Man City players than usual because the FA Cup final is played after the deadline but before their fixture in 37. So I don't think I would go for Haaland. So Palmer or Watkins, both good options this week. Some of the reasons you might want to use it this week rather than next week is because you know the players are fit. Whereas obviously players that you might want to go for in 38 could get rotated. They could potentially pick up an injury in between. So that's one reason to do it. I think if you're someone that's looking for a differential, I've already spoken about how big of a differential Palmer will be this week. In 38, you've got a lot of options for differentials. Like, I think, I'm actually not quite sure who the highest captain player is going to be in 38. I've got a feeling by the time we get to the deadline, it might be Saka, if not Salah. So going for like a Bowen versus Ipswich or a Bournemouth player versus Leicester could be good. The only thing about Bournemouth, they don't really have a huge amount to play for. 8th spot, I guess. They're probably maybe 8th spot if that remains open. You know, Semenyo got benched 2 games ago. Kluivert got benched last game. Would I be massively confident about predicting the lineup against Leicester? I mean, presumably Evanilson, Tavernier, Semenyo, Kluivert will all start. But based on what we've seen the last couple of weeks, I guess there's a little bit more doubt there. So I think the idea of saving it for one of them is probably not for me. So I would either use it this week on Watkins or Palmer, or I would use it next week on Saka or Salah. If I had to say my favourite option of the lot, it's probably the guy playing Southampton. So Saka, basically. But obviously there is some risk there about whether or not he'll definitely start, especially if Arsenal beat Newcastle this week. So differential, Palmer. If not, my favourite option is probably Saka. Also, there's going to be some questions about if I've got triple captain and bench boost left, which way round do I play it? I think I would prioritise, this is going to sound stupid, but I'd bench boost the week where you've got the best bench. Because and what I mean by that is, with the triple captain, you've got options in both weeks. Right? So if your bench is much worse in 38, I would definitely just use it in 37 and go for a Saka, Salah or a Bournemouth player in 38. If your bench is much better next week, just use it on Palmer or Watkins this week. Arguably, the triple captain can be worth more points, but I think it's easier to get more points with the bench boost generally than it is the triple captain. So I'd prioritise that, especially if there's a massive difference. That makes sense. Hopefully it does. If you enjoyed that, make sure to give it a like, hit that subscribe button. Thank you very much for watching, and I'll catch you tomorrow for team selection.